Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Wednesday the 24th of February, and joining me on this edition are audio reviewer Ed Selley.
I arrived in America's airport with clothings, US dollars and a jar of gypsy tears.
News editor Mark Hodgkinson.
This suit is not black.
And assistant editor Steve Withers.
I feel like American movie star Dirty Harold.
I'm not even that certainly wasn't anywhere close to being a good impression.
It was better than mine and Ed's.
I didn't try. I mean, it's a shame because my favourite Borat quote isn't in the film. It was back when he was doing it for television. It's like, in my country, we'll put dog on hot plate and make him dance.
Right, let's move on swiftly. Current competitions. Mark, tell us all about them.
We have Blu-rays to win. We have a copy of Blazing Saddles, and that's open to active members until the 2nd of March. And Bullet on Blu-ray, all members, 9th of March. And we do have a previous winner, if you're going to ask me that. Do you want to know who it was?
Yeah, go on.
It was the Boys from Brazil, run by Apollo. And I'll put Steve's witty quip in. Pity he didn't win the Rocky Blu-ray.
Yeah, that would have been excellent if Apollo had won Rocky.
That would have been good.
It wasn't to be. I'm looking forward to the people winning the Bullet Blu-ray. Obviously, it's got that iconic car chase, but I must have watched Bullet about 7 or 8 times. I couldn't tell you the plot if you held me at gunpoint. It just completely escapes my memory every single time.
We're going to do this one week, and we're going to do the worthy films that we've either never seen or didn't like. Never seen Bullet.
Oh, you're not missing out. It's got that iconic car chase, which I'm assuming you've probably seen on YouTube or whatever. The rest of it, it's incomprehensible for the most part, and weirdly paced.
So you can win that on Blu-ray.
Do get back to me, see if you agree.
Yeah, once you watched it, tell us if we're right or wrong, or tell Ed anyway, because I haven't seen it. Same way, Blazing Saddles. It's such a long time since I last saw that. We're talking about high school, so that was a long time ago. I don't think I've seen it since. I'm not really sure whether it would stand up.
If you like fart jokes, you like fart jokes.
Yeah, that's universal, isn't it, really?
What's it that Aid Edmondson quote in Blackadder goes forth? For me, the toilet is a simple convenience. For the British, the basis of an entire civilization.
Okay, so that's the competitions. Go and try and win some Blu-rays. And let's move on to hardware news. So Steve's been busy this week. The rest of us, not really sure what we've been doing. What have you been doing, Mark?
Not much. Watching Steve work. It's fun.
Ed, you been up to anything?
I have been getting to grips with Arcam's 2-channel AV receiver for its upcoming review.
Interesting. We've got a busy podcast today. Lots to talk about. I guess the first one we need to talk about is Philips. They launched their new TV lineup. Steve, you went to the exotic country of Belgium.
I did. Brussels, along with David Cameron, as it turned out.
Really?
Not the same event, has to be said.
You got more out of it, I think.
I probably did get more out of it.
So, I mean, the article's up there. People can go and read it. I am working on the video at the moment, so the video will be up before the podcast goes up. So there will be a video report as well, so people can see what the products look like. But very quickly, what were the main things to take away from the event?
Well, the main things are they carried over two TVs, the 8601 that we've already reviewed. We reviewed it last month. And also the 8901, which is going to be the one with the Ambilux, which is the TV with projectors in the back of it, so that it projects an image onto the wall behind the TV. Absolutely bonkers. But they were pushing it quite heavily. That will be coming out. It was supposed to come out last year. It got delayed. It's coming out next month. Around under $5,000, they said, and from an individual retailer. I don't know which one. So that's coming out in March.
Well, I'm thinking if it's under $5,000, it's what, $499,
probably,
and one retailer, Harrods, at that price. That would be my guess. Yeah,
that would also be my guess too. But they wouldn't say, and obviously they didn't want to confirm pricing because it's at they want the retailer to confirm that. But that's coming out next month. The 8601 is already out. That's the one with the detachable side speakers and 4-sided Ambilight that I reviewed quite recently. And then the other thing that was supposed to come out last year that unfortunately disappeared was the 9600, 9601 flagship TV. But the good news is that a lot of the tech that was going to be in that TV is now going to be in the 7601 that comes out in July. And that's going to be a 65-inch screen size. It's got a full array backlight, 128 dimming zones, a micro dimming premium, HDR support, pretty much all the stuff that was going to be in the more expensive flagship TV. So I think for people that were disappointed that 9601 didn't come out, you might be able to get a very similar experience. And I was watching demos of this, doing the same demo that we saw with the 9600 Phil, which was with the firework display at night. and it looked superb. So I think you might be able to get a similar performance for a lot less money, which would be quite a good deal actually for a change.
I mean, we're going to come on to the DX900 in a minute, but that was the closest backlight I've seen. Both of them are very, very similar in how they handle the backlight, local dimming, and the zones to prevent haloing, and both really, really good at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there were more dimming zones. I mean, there are 512 in the DX902. There were more there would have been more in the 9601. It's reduced to 120. Obviously, there's a certain cost factor attached to it. And this is not their flagship model. The 7601 is kind of a hero product, but it's not a flagship model. So in order to hit a specific price point, they're clearly reducing the number of LED zones. But it still looked very good in demos that I saw, as did the HDR. I think some guy commented on the photographs. Those are just photographs, and even the two images aren't even running in sync. So you can see the second image is actually during a firework exploding, and there's everyone bathed in light from the explosion, so that's why it looks different. I thought the demo looked very good. Lots of detail in the shadows, loads of detail in the bright parts of the image, and the fireworks exploding in people's jewelry and their clothes. It really showed you what HDR is capable of. And even though these TVs are not UHD premium, they're still hitting 700 nits peak on the 7601 and it's 10-bit. They didn't say how wide the color gamut was, but I think if it's priced correctly, that could be a very popular TV. The other thing that they did, they announced that there was no, they're not using curves this year. They basically said that we don't like curves, and there hasn't been very good feedback they've had from retailers and from consumers about curved TVs. So they basically just ditched curve. Concept of surprise. I don't think it's been as popular perhaps as a certain manufacturer would like us to think it is. The other thing that they said, and this was not exactly a surprise because there'd been rumours already about LG making similar noises, and certainly Samsung apparently had been rumoured to have said the same thing. But they said there's no 3D on any of their TVs this year. They say, as far as they're concerned, 3D is dead, and there's no 3D functionality on anything. And that was obviously, we had a clue that might be the case when we got the 8601 in for review, and there was no 3D on that. So no 3D this year. 3D's gone as far as Philips are concerned. Apparently, Samsung are in a similar opinion. And
only their flagships will have 3D.
Yeah. And LG dropped 3D off of the B6 OLED. So I can't say I'm massively surprised, but it's quite a ballsy move to just drop it from everything. I don't know how much of this necessarily is Philips' choice and how much of it is being dictated by their suppliers, but they said, 3D's dead and we've got other more important things we'd rather be concentrating on, like HDR. So, okay, fair enough. In terms of their lineup, most of it's going to be coming out between March and June, with the 7601 coming out in July. So that will just miss the European Championships, but it will be there available in time for the Olympics. And they promised they will definitely get. I mean, one of the big problems that Philips have had over the last couple of years, partly their fault and partly not their fault, has been that have had trouble getting product into shops. I mean, certainly 2 or 3 years ago, there were some great TVs they were making, but people just couldn't buy them. They couldn't find them anywhere. 2 years ago, they managed to get more into stores. Last year, they were delayed because of Android TV. I think this year they're going to make a massive effort to get their full lineup into UK stores on time, in the first half of the year. And I think that's important for them because they had some fairly lofty ambitions as far as their position in Europe is concerned, where they're actually quite often 2 or 3, second or third placed in a lot of European countries. And I think in Holland they're still number 1. But obviously in the UK they're currently 5th, I believe.
They're one of these brands which I think people forget how popular they were. Certainly it was brought to my attention during an IFA 2 or 3 years ago. They had a full wall of their TVs from like the 1960s right up to the present day. Philips TVs, and looking at the wall I was surprised at how many in the past that I've actually owned. And then you kind of realise, because I think anybody recently won't think of them as a particularly big brand, but I think if you go back to the 90s and beyond, the 90s and backwards, they were quite a big player in the market, as were ironically Toshiba and Sharp.
Yeah, I mean Philips definitely were a huge player in the TV market. They went through some difficult times in the noughties. And now, of course, the brand, the TV brand, is owned by TP Vision, who in themselves are a gigantic. In fact, if you combine their panel numbers with their monitor numbers, they're the largest manufacturer of panels and monitors in the world, bigger even than Samsung. So they're a huge company, and they've bought they've bought the TV brand Philips for everywhere but the US, which I believe is actually owned by Funai in the States. So it's a little bit complicated. But certainly they obviously place a lot of value in the name, and have also retained a lot of the expertise that was within Philips. And I think the TV market is not an easy market, and they're certainly, I think, doing a good job. As long as, like I said, if they can just get stuff into the shops, I think they produce some quite good products at very good prices, and I think they'll do well this year, as long as they get them into shops in time.
Now, another big thing, which I don't think they were supposed to announce, Steve.
No, it was not meant to be.
But the cat kind of got out of the bag, and that is round about IFA, around about September time, they're likely to announce their first OLED TV, which is going to be 55 inches and flat.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was really funny because we go to these Philips events every year, and also they do stuff at IFA, and they quite often have technical demos. And for the last couple of years, they've been sort of demonstrating how they can do LCD LED TVs that are as good as OLED. OLED's not that great, blah blah blah. Really dissing OLED. And then this year, it's like they had an OLED TV and an LCD TV, and they're going like, "Isn't OLED fantastic? Look how deep the blacks are. Look how great the colours are." And we're like, "Hang on a minute, you've changed your tune, haven't you?"
Yeah.
Are you planning on releasing an OLED TV? And then it was brilliant because it was Danny Tack, who's kind of the picture quality guru. And he's like, yes, we're planning on releasing one probably second half of this year. And I could see the looks on the managing directors' faces. It was like...
Was he bought it as well, was he?
It was so funny because you could just see the looks on the MD's faces as they thought, that's blown our big announcement for you. But then as everyone stopped tweeting away and stuff.
Well, it is interesting because it's going to be flat. It's going to be 55 inches.
It's obviously going to be an LG panel.
If they're not, yeah, it's going to be an LG panel. If they're not doing 3D, then it's likely going to be the B6 panel.
Yes.
Which is going to be interesting. But it's going to have their picture processing technology, which Danny's always been hot. And they have always done some really interesting processing stuff. Even if it's the type of stuff that, as image connoisseurs, we turn off. Some of the stuff, if you're into sport and fast moving, some of the processing they have is really, really good. And it'd be interesting to see how that marries in with an OLED panel. It'd
be really interesting to see what they do with the OLED, actually. And in terms of pricing, they did say they were planning on pricing it around about whatever LG are pricing at. So it's not going to be super expensive the way that the Panasonic was. So it'll be interesting. It'll be good, I think, even though it is an LG panel, it'll be good to have some choice in terms of OLED screens and hopefully at a reasonable price as well.
The biggest advantage there, though, Steve, sorry to cut in again, but if you've got competition, it's not necessarily competition, it's the fact that you've got Panasonic, you've got LG, you've now got Philips, you're likely going to have somebody else at some point, and there were strong rumours for a long time that Sony might be another one to pick up and purchase an OLED panel and release a TV. Wouldn't put it past them. We thought it might have been CES. It could happen later on, it might not happen, we don't know, we're kind of speculating. But if there's 3 brands now with OLED, that's got to be good for the perception, the public perception of the technology becoming mainstream, even though it is still quite expensive. It gets that momentum behind it to push it to market, more people behind it, more manufacturers, then the general public, they'll take an interest in it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be good for its profile in terms of the mass consumers. It'll also be good in terms of development too, because you don't really want one company having to shoulder all the R&D, all the development. If the other manufacturers are working on things like processing and image processing and stuff behind the panel itself, that's got to be good as well. So I think it's good news all round. Particularly if you're a fan of OLED technology, which I personally am. I think some more brands being involved in the OLED market is definitely good. And it'd be interesting to see when they do launch it, what it uses in terms of HDR, because at the moment they're using HDR10 on all their TVs, and it is almost all their 4K lineup, which is almost their entire range. It's a lot of 4K, but it's still a bit of full HD because obviously small screen sizes, it's full HD, but most of their larger screens, or all their larger screens sizes really are 4K, and most of it supports HDR10. Different levels, they've rather confusingly gone for HDR Plus and HDR Premium, which is really going to confuse a poor consumer,
and
I think.
What is the difference? Is it a nit value difference?
Yeah, nit value difference. Basically, right. HDR Plus up to about 500 nits, and HDR Premium goes up to 700 nits.
Which is still pretty bright for a LED LCD TV.
Yeah,
so I guess what the point you're making there is, will it come with Dolby Vision? Well, LG are the only people supporting in this country, in Europe. They are the only manufacturer supporting Dolby Vision. It's not on any of the players that are going to come out first quarter, first half of the year. And everybody else is HDR10, and Dolby Vision has to have an HDR10 layer anyway. So I don't get the rush, and comments on the forums as well, people saying, oh, well, if it hasn't got Dolby Vision, I'm not interested. That's kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face, because the vast majority of material is going to be HDR10, the vast majority of the equipment is going to be HDR10, and Dolby Vision is an add-on layer anyway. It's a 1080 add-on layer, isn't it? Enhancement layer.
Laid over the...
Which is laid over HDR10 anyway, so it's a slight enhancement, but it's not something that I would stop purchasing a bit of equipment for, because it hasn't got it. because at the moment there's only one manufacturer supporting it, and that's only on the display side. There's no source side at the minute.
Yeah, there's LG supporting it on their OLED TVs. And, you know, they can go up to 500 nits, can't they? That's their peak brightness. Well, given that HDR10 goes up to 1,000, and that's the most any TV this year is going to be able to achieve, then, you know, there is no actual benefit from having Dolby Vision, even if it was available on your TV, because that's mastered at 4,000 nits currently. Well, no TV can get anywhere near it. So, you know, whether you've got Dolby Vision or HDR10 on your TV this year is a complete irrelevance. And I really wouldn't worry about it. I think people are getting the knickers in a twist over something that just is a non-issue.
They're what?
They're knickers in a twist.
All right.
Over something that's a non-issue.
Well, it's how the internet works, isn't it? We saw that with the thread for the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is the DX900. We were fortunate. We got one through, I think it was first in the world, mainly because it's not available in the States. And it's not going to be available in the States for a while. But we got the review up nice and early. You spent a good week and a bit with it. Really good look at it. We knew that this was coming. We did a little bit of development stuff with the pre-production about 9 months ago now, and then we saw it again closed door at CES. There was one on the stand, but we also had a closed door demo with the professional monitors, so side by side with the professional OLED monitors from Sony. Although they had the name covered up, there's only one manufacturer of those. Yeah,
it wasn't difficult to guess, is it really?
Professional studio reference monitors. And the thing was at CES, and we mentioned it in the CES podcast, was how close this TV got to that picture quality. And in terms of colour, contrast, black levels and shadow detail, they were almost identical.
Yeah, it was really impressive. I mean, we're talking about, and against a professional monitor against a domestic TV, and there was barely anything in it. And that's impressive. And that is what Panasonic were trying to achieve here. That was their ambition from the start, to create a domestic LED LCD TV that they feel could give a performance that was almost as good as a professional monitor. And based upon my testing and experience with it, I would say they've achieved that goal. It was stunning. And now there's been an awful lot of comments in the thread about one thing in particular, which is input lag. This TV is not designed for gamers. If you're a gamer and you want a 20-second input lag, go and buy a gaming monitor or go and choose something else, because that's not what this is. This is designed for watching movies on as close as possible to what the content creators intended, and it achieves that fact. The input lag is high at 68 milliseconds. I've reported that to Panasonic. They've told Japan they're working at it, looking at it now. I can't guarantee they can make any difference and change it or improve it, but they're certainly aware of it and they're certainly working on it because they know it's an issue. But that is not what the TV was designed for. The TV is not designed for gaming. The TV is designed for watching movies. And if you're watching movies on this, it's absolutely stunning. The image accuracy out of the box, if we were scoring it as a post-calibrated performance, it would be referenced anyway, before we'd even calibrate it. You can fine-tune it to within an inch of its life. More importantly, it tracks extremely, almost perfectly in terms of tracking at 25, 50, and 75% as well. It also tracks almost perfectly on the DCI setting against DCI. And it hits 95.6% of DCI. So, for me, that means you're going to get the best possible performance with Rec 709 content. You're going to get the best possible performance with DCI color space content, which I know they're using a Rec 2020 container, but it's going to be a DCI color space inside that. It's going to hit that perfectly. What more could you want from a modern TV? It measured over 1,000 nits on a window, which means that their claims that they could A, hit over 1,000 nits and B, do it on a larger area than most of the competition, or all the competition, is held true as well. I had a little clip of the Lego movie, which I think you also saw, Phil, when we were in CES, on the bike being chased by the helicopters and that sort of stuff. And I've got the Lego movie on Blu-ray. I'm not kidding. Comparing the two, there wasn't any real difference in resolution, but it was like it was day and night. I mean, the difference was staggering in terms of the Blu-ray looked insipid. It just looked boring and rubbish in comparison, which I wasn't expecting. It was just such an improvement in terms of the blacks are blacker, the detail in the shadows and the detail in the bright parts. It just had more punch and more dynamic range to it. The colours were more vivid and richer. It was staggering, the difference. And I thought, blimey, if that's what HDR can deliver, then that's going to be a real game changer.
I guess an interesting point to bring in here, a question to ask, is that when you feed it HDR content, there's normally an override certainly on stuff that we've seen so far that is HDR compatible. There's an override where it overrides and greys out a lot of menus and stuff. Is that the case with this TV?
It did, yes. Now, what happened was it detects it, and immediately, this is the first time I watched something on it, so it was brand new at the time. It went to 100 on the backlight, which is way too high. I don't think it needed to be that high, but brought it down a bit. But you can bring it down. But the advanced section was advanced settings submenu was grayed out. But it was also only giving me the option. This was through USB, by the way. It was only giving me the option for normal and dynamic. Now, according to Panasonic, I talked to them this morning. They said that's not meant to be the case. So either there was a bug. There must be a bug somewhere, because you're meant to be able to access all the different picture settings even from USB as well as from HDMI. So they're aware of that too. So it did limit it a little bit in what I could do. I don't know whether maybe if you had, say, a pro setting, you could access things like advanced settings and still change them. Because if you go into those settings when you're watching normal content, you can select things like, the is it EOTF 702084, is it? You can select Rec 2020, you can select DCI, you can do all these things in. Now, should I just say, by the way, Rec 2020 is not Rec 2020. It still taps out at the native color space, which is roughly DCI.
The TV is only capable of 95% of
but
DCI.
But it's designed to sort of track up to as far as it can go, as close as possible to Rec 2020. So you can do all that. Those are all selectable options inside the menus. So I don't know whether that's just a bug that I wasn't able to access all the different viewing modes, or whether that's meant to be the case. They said it wasn't meant to be the case, so it could well be a bug. I mean, don't forget, this is obviously the TVs hadn't even hit the stores yet, so maybe it's a bug there. But they're aware of that, and they're looking into that as well.
So without spoiling the review, because obviously we want people to go and read the review and read what your findings are, basically in wrapping up on the DX902, is it a TV you would own, Steve?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to have one of these TVs in my lounge. I thought it was fantastic. Because don't forget, not only is it incredibly accurate in terms of colours, it's also got 512 LED zones. It's got the new honeycomb local dimming, which is meant to prevent light spill, and the new diffuser, which works really well. It's got the black levels, fantastic. Particularly if you're sat directly in front of the TV, there's very, very little haloing at all, even when it's quite bright with HDR content. And I just thought it was an absolutely stonking television. And I didn't think I'd ever say that about an LED LCD television, but it was really good.
And if the price of OLED was only 500 quid more.
Whoa, we're talking about last year's OLED or this year's OLED?
This year.
I don't know, I haven't seen this year's yet.
Well, you've seen them at CES, so
yeah, they look good. I mean, if an OLED can deliver the same kind of color accuracy for both DCI and Rec 709, if it's calibratable the way that the Panasonic is, and that's not always been the case with LG. If it can deliver that kind of performance, plus obviously it has the advantage of of the superior black levels and the fact that it's self-emitting rather than using local dimming, then it will certainly be a tough call. I mean, if the prices are close, it's going to be a real battle royale between the two of them, I think.
Now the thing is, right? We know the DX902 measures zero nits because it switches the backlight off to achieve that.
Yes.
This is where the differences are in black levels, and I think this is where people are getting confused, because they take that measurement and they think that is a superior black level to OLED. That is not, because what happens if there's a star in that block, say it's a Star Wars film or something that you're watching, then it can't switch itself off completely, which means it raises the black level. So the zero is a red herring. You're never going to have zero. You should never have zero anyway in an image. An image will always have 0.5 of a nit in it, and there'll always be detail on a really good monitor from that level upwards, even in the blacks. And that's what gives the blacks a fluid look, and that's what gives the black... that's a proper black. Not where it's black and there's nothing in it, because there's always something in the background, in the black. And that's the difference between an OLED and an LED LCD TV that switches it off. Where the LED LCD TV has to perform is with shadow details, and it's always been a weak point of that technology.
Yeah.
So,
although it's been a struggle with OLED as well to a degree.
With some, yeah, because of the... let's not get into it, but with bit depth in the black levels, sometimes it has been an issue. Whereas plasma, obviously, with a drive that the plasma uses, a completely different way of driving the panel. It was always uniform across there, and it was all... But let's forget that, it's old technology now. But that is the differences. So even though it measures zero, that's not a real world figure, and forget about that, because there are differences in black levels. But I've got to say, when I saw the pre-production of the DX900, and I used the Sunshine, which you used in your review as well.
I used as well, yeah.
The detail in the black level on an LED LCD TV, I could not believe what I was seeing. It was really fluid. It looked very, very plasma-like. And you got to think, well, this is Panasonic you're talking about. They know how to generate good images, and that really stood out for me, because it was side by side with a Samsung, and the Samsung was more blocky in the blacks. Didn't have the same. It wasn't pulling the same detail, and I mean the finest of detail out that the DX900 was. So again, from what you're saying and what I've seen as well, I think is one of the first LED LCD TVs that does black properly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could say, you could argue the case of whether you go for this or an OLED TV, and I love OLED. I think the image is fantastic. But some people have asked me the question, how does this compare to a plasma? Different thing entirely. I mean, we're not talking about, we're talking about a TV here that's 4K, supports HDR, has a DCI color space, does all the other stuff that we're talking about. There's no comparison between that and a 3-year-old plasma that's 1080p. That's dead technology now. Forget it. If you've got a plasma and you're thinking about grading, that you would not be disappointed if you bought the DX902.
Steve, did you contemplate a different award? Because reading through the review is...
I did.
Now,
there's a couple
how close did it get?
Well, I think it would be difficult to award something a reference status when you haven't seen anything else. Because what's your point of reference at that point? You've got no point of reference. But you could say, you could differentiate between different technologies and say that's a reference for one technology, that's a reference for LED LCD technologies. You could also make that argument. But I think, to award a reference status, plus there are issues. First of all, aside from the input lag we've already mentioned, 3D had a bit of crosstalk in it. I mean, we could say at least they're still doing 3D, which is more than some of the other manufacturers are doing, but there was some crosstalk in 3D, which is disappointing. Although the brightness of it meant that, you'd had, even wearing the glasses, it was still a lovely bright image. And clearly it's a VA panel. So one of the big advantages OLED has over this TV would be the viewing angles. Once you start to move 25 degrees either way of center, you're going to start seeing a drop off in the contrast performance, because that's just the nature of technology. And that again, it means it can't, it does limit its abilities to, unless you're sat directly in front of it, which obviously I am most of the time. But if you're looking for something where you're going to have people spread out across the room and looking at different angles.
If you're talking about people who've got like a normal family with kids and all the rest of it. Not people like us, Steve, where we just sit in front of the TV.
And that's not a criticism of television, by the way. I mean, that's just the nature of VA panels. I mean, that would be the same whether it was a Sony or a Samsung. So I did think about it long and hard, Mark.
Okay, just put it another way then. Would you say this was better? Would you say, I'm not saying you should have given it a reference, by the way. Would have been the devil's advocate here. Would you say it's a better TV than the last TV you gave a reference status to, i.e. an LG OLED?
Well, no, the last TV that got the reference was the Panasonic OLED.
CZ152.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. And I take it that you find the CZ better overall.
Yes. Okay. In terms of, it's got a similar level of color accuracy, because again, that was a TV where Panasonic were pulling all the stops out in terms of delivering something that could compete with the studio monitor. And it was again a no compromise, as was evidenced by the price, a no compromise approach to picture quality, and they certainly delivered that. And it obviously has all the advantages of OLED, the superior black levels, the wider viewing angles, but. Let's be honest here. You can pick up the 65-inch DX902 for 3,200 quid. That's a hell of a good price. I mean, that's a hell of a price for what you're getting. That's the other thing I probably should mention. Value-wise, you could almost say it should get a Best Buy. I mean, that's a staggering. I mean, was it 2,700 for the 58-inch version? Wow. I mean, you're getting an awful lot of TV for your money there.
Let's move things on, because I think we've talked enough TV, and we're going to have, not next week because the podcast isn't around next week, but the following week we're going to be talking a shed load of TV as well, because we'll have had the Panasonic convention, and hopefully we'll know exactly what's coming, so we'll cover it in more detail in the next podcast. So let's move on, and it's movie reviews next. What's at the cinema, Steve?
Opening this weekend, we had 999 and also The Finest Hours. 999 was reviewed by Kaz on the site. He was quite looking forward to this, and I think he was a little bit disappointed. He felt that it much like John Hillcott's other films, it tends to sort of start well and then drift off towards the end. He gave it a 7 out of 10. I think the best thing in it is Kate Winslet playing a Russian mafia mob boss. So there you go. Probably worth seeing it for that alone, really. And the other one is The Finest Hours, which is a 3D movie about an actual rescue in 1952, I believe it was, where a tanker literally breaks in half, and the front half sinks and the second half is still staying afloat, and these guys have to go out in a little lifeboat to try and save them in the middle of this massive storm. And that got 7 out of 10 as well from Kumari. And I think I quite fancy this, actually, because a lot of people are saying it plays much like, not only is it set in 1952, but it plays like a 1950s movie in terms of the way people behave and act, but with modern technology, making this really visceral, realistic storm. And I thought I quite fancy that. It might be worth picking up perhaps on disc at some point.
For what it's worth, my wife genuinely enjoyed it. And it has one thing that she found quite refreshing, and it's quite sad that this is the case. it feeds on from what you were saying about its sort of 50s era vibe. This isn't necessarily 50s era vibe, but it's unusual in 2016 that it was quite refreshing to watch a piece of film entirely self-contained within itself that isn't that long, and it's not been made with hopes of a sequel or spin-offs or its relative position to some other cinematic universe. It's just a film which you sit down and watch and take on its own merits.
Is your wife free to review movies? Because I'd much rather listen to her summing them up than Steve. She seems to get bang on nail.
Oh, what, we want more bleak as fuck, do we?
She can sing them to us as well. That'd be nice.
Well, I will put it.
Didn't she review The Croods as being about as much fun as drowning?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need her on.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the idea, Mark, of her singing the review. This sounds excellent.
Heart music in the
You'll have to
background.
pay for that. But no. For what it's worth, my wife, she's relatively critical of most films, but it's not a masterpiece, but it's something you can go and watch on its own merits, and when it's done, it's done. Job's a good one, and that's all fine.
Good stuff. Right, so opening this Friday. I didn't know about this until I saw a clip on YouTube, Steve. It was the Kimmel Live in the US. It's Sacha Baron Cohen film. It's called Grimsby. It's called The Brothers Grimsby in the US. Hadn't heard anything about this until I saw the trailer and this clip from the Kimmel show. And it was such a graphic clip that they couldn't show it to the TV audience. They had to show it to the audience in the studio. And they could only show the reaction that the studio audience were having to the clip. And it's probably the funniest 30 seconds of TV I've seen in a long time. Just their reaction to what was going on screen. And you want to know what's going on the screen. So in terms of marketing, I think it worked brilliantly.
Yeah, the same thing on Jonathan Ross. I think it's a marketing masterstroke, to be honest. It obviously just makes you want to see what everyone's in hysterics about. But yeah, I didn't really like the trailer so much, but then I was quite enticed to watch by the audience reaction.
Yeah, I saw the trailer before Deadpool, actually, and I don't know, it felt like it was pandering to every northern stereotype you can imagine, and I didn't see like a high point in Mark Strong's career, I have to say, playing the second brother. I don't know. I'm kind of curious, but it has worked because now I'm curious to see what everyone was reacting to in that clip. So I probably will end up seeing it, if not at the movies.
Well, Sacha Baron Cohen, it's going to be pretty sick. It's going to be pretty out there. He's never held back, has he, when it comes to humour? I mean, Ali G was quite timid, actually, when you see the likes of Borat.
Borat nude wrestling, that was pretty graphic.
And what was the other
Bruno.
Bruno, yeah.
If those that don't know what the film's about, it involves two brothers, two orphans who were split up at a very young age, and one grows up to become a super spy, and the other one grows up in Grimsby, and unfortunately meet up as adults and reunite, and then the brother who grew up in Grimsby starts to get in the way a bit, I think, of the spy's mission, and ensue comic mishaps.
Yeah,
and something graphic and revolting by the looks of that clip on the Jimmy Kimmel show.
With elephants, by the sound of it as well. I mean, it could work. I mean, the other one that kind of took the genre very much tongue-in-cheek was Kingsman, which I eventually caught up with a couple of weeks back, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I
really enjoyed Kingsman.
I thought it was really laugh out loud. So I don't think he's ever made a really bad film. I think his type of humour, Sacha Baron Cohen, it's the type of humour where you feel embarrassed for the guy. It's a bit like Ricky Gervais, where you feel embarrassed, and it's that kind of, you want impulse to switch off, which I think you either love it or hate it. And I've got to say, Borat, it took me 2 or 3 seconds to get through that because I just found it so excruciatingly embarrassing at some points. I just had to switch off.
I've not really liked him on the big screen. I've liked him on TV.
I'm exactly the same. It's one of those things where it works perfectly for 5 minutes, but not for 90.
Yeah. I think
as a means of, I mean, the original, when it was whatever the hell that thing was on
11 o'clock show.
11 o'clock show.
That was it.
Yeah.
That's where Gervais.
And it was just a brilliant means of just unmasking people's views or opinions using the Ali G character, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean the early interviews that they did, it was almost like the day-to-day when they did the cake.
Cake, yeah.
Cake.
Yes. Cake is a made-up drug.
Oh, brilliant. I'm gonna have to watch that clip again, but yeah, it's like that, and it works in little sections, like Gervais did as well. I mean, Gervais started on the 11 o'clock show as well, didn't he? As a
Yes.
correspondent and as a character who was pretty out there, and like you say, it works for like 5-10 minutes. Any longer than that, it's like the Ali G movie as well. It fell flat in its face. It just didn't work, did it? Because they tried to draw it out too much. You probably could say the same about Partridge as well. Alpha Papa, it was all right, but it was a bit drawn out.
It was better than Ali G, but
yeah, it was still a bit drawn out, wasn't it?
Yeah, not a patch on the TV series. But hey,
Steve
we have
Coogan
to
is
try.
dead to me anyway.
So in the same place as Hugh Grant in the
Yeah,
shit list.
Yeah, that's it. No more money to Coogan.
He tried to nick my girlfriend, Steve Coogan.
What?
When I was about
Hang on. This sounds like a weather story. This really
tell
does
us
sound like a
more,
weather
Mark.
story.
I was in an unsalubrious nightclub in between Fallowfield and Didsbury, and he was there, and he tried to steal my girlfriend.
Did he succeed?
No, he went away with a flea in his ear.
Was
It's
the
all a bit
hygiene
hazy.
particularly
It's all a bit
poor up
hazy,
there?
but yes. There you go. I didn't know who he was then,
So how do you know Steve Coogan?
because someone I was with knew who he was, and I didn't know who he was. He wasn't really on TV then. He was just a aspiring stand-up. There you go.
So you probably would have had more success now he's famous. With you.
I'd imagine he did have no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, that's definitely a weather story. That
It's not like
up
me
there.
to throw one in there. That way.
Although yours is probably true, Mark.
Yeah, mine is true.
All my stories are unfortunately true.
Well, I don't know what to say to that. It's your life. You lived it.
Anyway, that's Grimsby. It's coming out to the cinema this Friday.
Actually, it comes out on Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday? Is it? Okay, so that comes out the day of the podcast. It comes out
So
tonight.
that gives it, what, an opening weekend of 7 days?
That's that's what they do these days.
Yeah.
Things start opening earlier and earlier to have a bigger
Yeah,
opening
it's-
weekend.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick now, isn't it? The Wednesday. There was a couple last
Opening
week.
at 001 a.m. on Monday.
Well, there has been at least a couple of examples where it's opened on the Saturday when it's meant to open the following Friday. So they've had like a 7-day opening weekend.
It's just getting to the stage now. It won't be too long before you get a cinema release at the same time as it's on a streaming service or some
They
other
have
way.
tried that haven't they, a few times.
It's already
Yeah.
happened, isn't it?
Yeah.
A field in England did that.
Did
Yeah,
you go
but
and see it?
At the cinema? No, I watched it on Channel 4 because it was also
Oh,
on
yeah.
TV simultaneously.
That's right.
It's like,
That's right. I remember.
that was free and easier.
Okay, Blu-rays this week. I think I'm going to go and buy both of these. In fact, probably going to go tonight up to Tesco and pick them up. Spectre and Crimson Peak. And Crimson Peak is the first DTS-X disc. And we've already discussed this.
I have, although now I've actually watched it, which helps.
And?
I saw it last night. Fantastic. I mean, it's I quite enjoyed Crimson Peak, although I can understand why some people didn't. But in terms of its visuals and sound design, stunning. The visuals are opulent film. I mean, it just oozes production design and a very specific color scheme, and it's just stunning to look at. But it's also got a staggeringly good sound design because when they're in the house, which is kind of almost like a character in itself, it's alive, it's breathing around you, and there are sounds going through pipes and stuff like that, and they're going all around the room and across the ceiling and around the sides. I mean, absolutely, it takes full advantage of the additional speakers that either DTS-X or if it had been Atmos would have allowed. So it totally immerses you in this house in particular, and when the ghosts turn up and sort of stuff, it's very scary in places. And a very, very effective sound design. I was really, really impressed by it. Haven't seen Spectre yet, although I got my disc last week.
You went to the cinema to see it, though, didn't you?
I did. I saw it at cinema, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I didn't see it at the cinema, so as you know, I'm going to go and get the disc, and I'll probably watch it tomorrow night and see what it's like. Am I in for a treat, or is it?
See what you think of the photography, because Skyfall was shot digitally, wasn't it? This was shot on 35mm, and I remember at the cinema thinking it looked a little soft. So
Okay. Yeah,
it could have been the cinema, obviously, but I have heard other people say the same thing. So
Okay. Talking about the cinema, certainly the last film I saw at the cinema, I saw it in 3D, Steve, in IMAX, and I have to say, for first time in a long time, I actually enjoyed the 3D experience. But it seems to be that, well, I said it a few years ago, and I got absolutely there's a thread on an American forum where somebody took offence to what I said, which was basically I don't see 3D being a success because you're relying on people wearing glasses at home, sitting in front of a TV, and a TV screen is not big enough to get the effect. On a projector, on a bigger screen, you get more of it. It fills more your field of view, and it's a better experience. Plus, if you're sitting in a cinema room with a projector and stuff, you don't necessarily mind putting the glasses on. I think in the living room, there's the whole having to get up, go and get the glasses, sit down, put the film on, small screen. So I said I didn't see it being I didn't think it was going to be a success back then. And this forum thread on our US forum, they were like, "Oh, how dare you," and all the rest of it. But I guess, I'm not going to say I told you so, but it's starting to get to the point where those were the issues, and it seems to be that's what's killed it off in the home, at least.
Yeah. I don't want to. Obviously, I don't want to wear two pairs of glasses for the most part, so I'm not wildly keen on it at the cinema as well. But no, at home, no, that can just get stuffed. Frankly, it just doesn't. It's never done anything for me, and it's just I don't know. In so much as for home viewing as well, films are a slightly communal thing. It's just a layer of detachment between you and everybody else as you sit there and you're doing a sort of Bono impersonation, and it's just it's never.
I think the thing as well, when first, second, and third generations of this technology, I think the glasses were the issue, weren't they, Steve? Because they were too dark. Some of them were really quite sore to wear for any length of time because they were too small, or the design wasn't particularly good, or light was coming in from the side. There seemed to be a lot of issues, whereas my recent cinema experiences have been very good because the glasses, they're passive, they're light. You forget you're wearing them. Actually, they're easy to wear in front of a pair of glasses if you wear glasses anyway. The lenses are nice and big, and you're getting a lot of light back through them. And it's in the home, that was the issue. The glasses were the issue. Now they are getting better, or certainly have been getting better.
I think it's
recently.
ironic that just as everyone's starting to quietly ditch 3D, it's actually been the best it's ever been in terms of experience at home.
Yeah.
If you think about a 4K, and I'm thinking specifically here about LG, but a 4K OLED panel with 1080p for each eye and passive and a bright image, you're getting some absolutely fantastic 3D that you couldn't have even dreamed of when it first launched. What was it, 5 years ago?
2010.
2010. Oh, blimey, yeah. So nearly 6 years ago now. So, suddenly it's got really good just as everyone's finally realised that no one's that interested. Unfortunately, whilst I do like 3D, and obviously a lot of forum members are fans, and they're enthusiastic, they like 3D. And so they're quite up in arms about the idea of 3D being quietly dropped by a lot of manufacturers. But the reality is that the majority of people couldn't care less about watching 3D at home. They don't want to wear the glasses. They don't find it particularly enjoyable. It's not because it's a TV, the image isn't big enough, it's not immersive. Whereas it is still popular at the cinema, no question about that. If you look at the numbers for Force Awakens, that did extremely well in terms of 3D screenings. So there's still a demand for it in the cinema. There's a big demand for it in certain countries, particularly places like China, where it's still hugely popular. But I have noticed, certainly in the States, there's been a big drop-off in the amount of Blu-ray 3D releases. Quite often films that were available in 3D, certainly some of the Disney films, I've noticed have not been released in America in 3D, even though there's a 3D version available, although they still continue to support it in this country. A good example would be Frozen. I'm pretty sure Frozen did not get a 3D release in the States, but it was released on 3D Blu-ray in this country. So they have been gradually phasing them out. And more films are conversions. It's quite rare now to find a native 3D film production. It's almost all post-production conversion to 3D these days. The most recent example I can think of that was actually native was The Martian. Even things like The Walk were shot in 2D and then converted in post. So there's less and less native 3D. There are less and less Blu-rays. Obviously, there's no broadcast channels left anymore. I think they're all gone now.
I think that in many ways that was a prime indicator that all was not well, that neither the BBC nor Sky could get any meaningful traction with 3D broadcasting. That just said no, people aren't bothering with this in the home.
I think there was a lot of technical issues as well that kind of hindered things and didn't help in the production of putting together a 3D production. I mean, I've been on one 3D shoot, which was at Air Studios, and it was Paul Carrick, and it was a 3D shoot of his new album at the time. and it was a Panasonic launch that was happening that day, but I'd went early on to film them filming in 3D and all the rest of it. And the complexity, I mean, they must have done the same number. Now, normally they would shoot it 2 or 3 times, so they'd do the same number 2 or 3 times with different camera angles and all the rest of it, and they had a lot of dolly shots and that kind of thing. So they were filming it 3 times, so they got plenty of coverage to put together a nice looking musical number for a TV program. And it was a TV program at the time that they were filming it for. But with 3D, they were doing it 6 or 7 times, and a lot of the time it was to do with the parallax of the cameras, and sometimes it was all wrong and it didn't look right, and it was giving people headaches, and the only way they could check as well was with anaglyph glasses, which I found astonishing at that moment in time. That's what they were using on one of these monitors to check the depth of the shots and so on. So there was so much complexity in doing that. Now, that was a pre-recorded thing where they had the ability to do that 7, 8, 9 times for each number to get the shots that they wanted and to correct things that went wrong. If you look at live sport, certainly TV live sport like football and tennis and stuff, which they tried 3D in, the complexities of doing that and getting a shot that actually worked, because I think what they started to revert to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly from the 3D broadcasts that I watched, they started using static cameras.
Yeah, they had about 3 angles for Wimbledon. So you had the one behind the
exactly.
The returner.
So they knew they would set in advances to get the parallax right for the 3D, and then they left it. They didn't touch it. They didn't do any pans. They didn't move it on a dolly. They didn't do anything with it that would affect. And that's just too hampering when you're talking about a creative subject, even a live creative thing like football or tennis. You know, you want to live in the moment and be able to capture all this stuff, and you just couldn't do it in 3D.
You should have just pushed through a contract that they, in the event of it going a bit skew-if, the Wimbledon finalists would just have to do it again.
Well, that's it. You can't do it again, can you? So, you know.
But also, they kept trying to use camera angles that would emphasise the depth. So, for example, having a camera behind the baseline, you couldn't see what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
Same with the football and rugby; they put the cameras down on the touch line. And you had depth, but you had no idea who had the ball or where it was going. I mean, ultimately, the reason that they do shoot from above on, say, football, for example, is because that's you get the best view of what's going on.
The only sport I ever watched in 3D that genuinely worked, and I thought was spectacular. Very good. Yeah, it was on one of the demo discs. You know the one I mean. We used to watch it over and over and over. But the one sport, the live sport that did work, and it added to the experience, and you've finally got to see how difficult the job was for the sportsman, was golf, because you got the undulations of the fairway, and especially on the putting green, you could then see that there was 3 or 4 different levels to the putting green. You could actually, if it was behind the ball, you could actually read the line yourself. While the golfer was trying to read the line, you could see it because you could see the undulations in 3D.
Was it the Masters that they did 3D?
Yeah, and it was pretty spectacular.
The only thing was that things at the distance looked like 2D cardboard cutouts.
Yeah, they did, obviously. There was issues with that. But that was the one time where I thought, actually, that does genuinely add to the experience. And it lets you see just how... Because when you see it on a 2D screen, especially on the greens when they're putting, you don't actually get that sense of how far the ball's travelling, or if it's an uphill putt or a downhill putt, or if it's undulations or different levels. You can't really see that on a 2D shot. And that's the one time I saw a 3D sport and I thought, yeah, that actually adds something. And the other thing,
handy in rugby as well. When they were goal kicking between the posts, you could actually tell when it went through between the posts, which you can't always tell in 2D. But that was the one time in rugby when it was useful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was like...
Yeah, and I'm really surprised that gaming didn't take off, because that was one of the things that they pushed back in 2010, 2011. And, the stuff that you would watch when manufacturers were demonstrating it, and it looked really impressive, the gaming.
I think for gaming, though, they viewed it, it became increasingly clear, and I'm speaking as a person that doesn't play computer games, but you look at feeds on Twitter and technology websites and so on and so forth, that they very quickly saw it as an intermediate step, and the thing that then immediately just sort of pushed it out the way was the pursuit of full virtual reality, which is now beginning to slowly and notionally start to...
It's just 3D after all, isn't it?
Yeah,
this is true.
Yeah, but again, I've got to say, I've used an Oculus Rift. You have as well, Steve. The one thing about that technology, I don't know if it's improved from the 12 months ago when I had one over my head. But in terms of resolution, really poor, which kind of detracted from the experience.
Yeah, that will get better and better. I find it quite disorientating as well when you're totally immersed in a different world and you're looking around. And suddenly, you're in a toilet or something like that, or a bathroom, and then the one we were looking at was being used as a way of demonstrating interior design. But
had you gone for a very, very long lunch?
But when you're actually standing in the middle of a big, ballroom in a hotel, it was a bit weird. But no one looks cool wearing one of those headsets. So
no, and again, coming back to 3D, I think that was a big problem as well, is getting people to wear the glasses in the home, and the glasses were never well designed, and it's like you say, it's kind of ironic that we're getting to the stage now where manufacturers are dropping this technology from their TVs and stuff, and we're getting to the point where actually in terms of performance, I don't think there was many issues. It's certainly I always enjoy the £1,000 DLP projectors that come in for review, because 3D always looks great on them. And you've got to think, if you're into 3D films and you don't necessarily want to spend a hell of a lot of money, get yourself a little DLP projector for 3D, because they are absolutely cracking quality wise, and good brightness as well from them. For a home 100-inch screen, less than £1,000, you get that experience. But sadly, like you say, the discs are starting to dry up, and as we can see from Philips, no longer doing any 3D TVs. Samsung, only their high-end models are going to be 3D. LG dropping 3D from one of their TVs this year, and Sony are only doing it on their high-end TVs. So as you can see, as a technology, it's on its last legs. It's the same with the Curve. I think the Curve's going out as well, like you mentioned at the beginning. Samsung, what really stood out for me when we went and had a look at the dealer room, Steve, was 50% of the TVs were flat from their lineup.
That's not something that hasn't been widely reported yet, and Samsung certainly haven't been talking about it a lot. But I think they are gradually moving back to flatter screens. I don't think curved, despite what they might say, has been the big success they hoped it would be.
No, and that was clear to see. As soon as you walked into that room, you're thinking, well, there's hardly any curved TVs here, which is a bit strange. But anyway, getting back to 3D, is it dead? I think it's dead because it's not going to be available much longer on equipment. It just looks that like it's going to get dumped. And in terms of software, there's only the disc formats that are still available in 3D.
Not supported by 4K, of course, either.
No, exactly. So is it dead? I think it's on life support. It's on life support.
It'll be back though, because 3D goes in 30-year cycles. It's been doing that since the beginning, 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, 2010. So 2040 we'll have more 3D again.
I look forward to 80-year-old Steve Weathers giving it large in his reviews.
Of course, the big white hope was always going to be glasses free 3D, and we've seen a lot of prototypes, Steve, over the time. It's one of the lucky things going to CES and shows like that, is that you get to see these prototypes. Haven't seen one that's convincing.
No, they're getting better.
If you wanted to accurately replicate what you see if you drink 5 or 6 cans of Tennant Super or Special Brew, it was absolutely peerless. As a means of sitting down and watching television, I wasn't anything like as convinced.
We saw one this year. I'm trying to remember whose stand it was on now. I think it was TCL. Was it TCL or?
Yeah, was that TCL or was it Heiss? No, it was one of the Chinese manufacturers, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was. It was one of them, and it was okay, but it was very dark, and the reflections killed it, and
you couldn't move your head.
And yeah, so
weren't Dolby behind one at one point?
Yes,
Dolby glasses, they were, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
On the HDR bandwagon now, they're not interested.
Yeah, but HDR has all the hallmarks of gaining some traction. It doesn't require you, the person, to be in any way different when viewing it, and it has sort of support across sort of multiple start points. So
that's a good point that you raised there, Ed, and it's one that everybody keeps forgetting about as well, is that not everybody sees 3D. And a lot of people have medical conditions or just can't see the effect, and there's a lot of people out there that have that issue. And
my daughter can't see it. My 10-year-old can't see 3D.
There you go. So there are people out there that have issues with 3D as well. So like you say, I mean, the stuff that's coming this year, like resolution, as long as you've got fairly good eyesight, resolution, HDR is really going to stand out, because it's more about the contrast of the image. in the wider colour gamut, that really stands out as well. Like Steve says, when you looked at the Blu-ray version against the HDR version of the Lego Movie, the Blu-ray one's extremely muted in terms of...
I was quite shocked, actually, at just how different, going back to the Blu-ray, how disappointing it was. And it's a great Blu-ray. I mean, this would have been a state of the art when it came out last year, 10 out of 10 for picture and sound. But comparing it to the HDR version, it was actually a bit of a shock.
And there you go, people. Today's technology, Steve went from a really poor and compressed sound at the start of that sentence to nice and clear at the end, thanks to his internet connection.
HDR for voices.
It's like a metaphor. That's beautiful.
Anyway, that's enough nonsense for this week. Thank you very much for listening, and that's all the time we got for this week's podcast. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Just getting into character.
Clears his throat, applies the false moustache.
No, can't do that one. Okay. I like to make sexy time.
Ed Selley.
He's still asshole. I get iPod, he only get iPod mini. Everybody know it's for girls.
And Mark Hodgkinson.
Pamela, I am no longer attracted to you anymore. Not.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can bookmark AVForums for latest reviews, news and video. And of course, you can leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. And as it's the beginning of the month, on the next podcast, we'll read them out. So leave us 5 stars, we'll read your name out. And like I say, we're not here next week, so please do not tune in for the podcast. We are taking our half-term break. We're off to the Panasonic convention. So we're back on the podcast on the 9th of March with lots more TVs to talk about. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.